With thousands of young people traveling to Japan every year, many of whom go to work as English teacher, here's a question. Who was the first English teacher, now that's official English teacher, to ever venture to the land of the rising sun? The answer to that question is, for the most part, undisputed, but how he ended up in Japan is really interesting. But the question that is a little controversial is, what was the nationality of that individual? The man in question is Ranald Macdonald.
Hey!
No, not Ronald McDonald, Ranald Macdonald. And he's credited with being the first native English speaker to ever teach English in Japan. I'm going to talk a bit about him and where he came from, but first, let's briefly talk some history. It's 1848. Japan is still a very isolated country. In fact, for the past 200 years, it's been under a self-imposed policy of isolation called sakoku. And since the early 1600s, no foreigner or Japanese person could ever enter or leave the country. To do so, you would end up facing the death penalty. In 1845, at the age of 21, Ranald Macdonald decided to abandon the life of a banker to become a sailor. During his first 3 years, he became fascinated by stories of Japan, and in 1848, he managed to convince the captain of the Plymouth, that's the whaler which he was sailing with, to drop him just off the coast of Hokkaido and to make it look like he was shipwrecked. He had heard stories that even with the strict isolation policies in effect, the Japanese would never put the shipwrecked sailors to death, as clearly they had landed on Japanese soil, not by their own volition. So that's exactly what happened. On July 1st, 1848, he was rescued and subsequently captured by some Ainu fishermen just off the coast of Rishiri Island. That's again just off the coast of Hokkaido. The Japanese authorities almost immediately sent him to Nagasaki, which was the only place at that time where trade between Japan and the rest of the world was permitted. The court heard his story about being shipwrecked, and they believed him, sentencing him not to death, but to house arrest, and he was put to work teaching English, making Ranald Macdonald the first English teacher in Japan. And the reason why we know he was the first English teacher in Japan is because he taught some really important people. In particular, this person, Moriyama Inosuke, a samurai and language expert. He was called upon to assist when Commodore Perry arrived in Yokohama with his gunships to break open Japan. So by extension, Ranald was in part responsible for the successful negotiations leading to the opening of Japan. Good job, Ranald. I found this story fascinating, not only because I had taught English in Japan as well when I was young, but Ranald's grave is located about 20 minutes from where I grew up in southern BC. But wait, here comes the controversy. What nationality was Ranald Macdonald? First, let's talk some more history. Ranald Macdonald was born on February 3rd, 1824 at Fort George, a Hudson's Bay trading post. Fort George was the current location of the city of Astoria, Oregon, but at that time, Oregon did not exist, and the North American map looked something like this. What is now known as the Pacific Northwest was claimed by both Great Britain, which called it the Columbia District, and the United States, which called it Oregon Country. But at the time, the only people who lived there were the First Nations people, French Canadian traders, and the British. So anyone born there at that time would have been considered the nationality of the country of their parents, or perhaps whichever country controlled the fort or community where the person was born. Here's the kicker. Ranald Macdonald's father was Archibald Macdonald, a Scottish fur trader working for the Hudson's Bay Company, a decidedly Canadian company. His mother was Quale Shoa, and I'm not sure about the pronunciation, but she was the daughter of a First Nation Chinook leader, virtually royalty. And as mentioned, he was born within a Hudson's Bay trading post, a Canadian institution. From all of that, the only thing that we as outsiders can say is that Ranald was definitely of First Nations and Scottish ancestry because of his parents, but if they were issuing passports at that time, it is highly unlikely that he would have ever received a US passport. But probably the best person to ask would be Ranald himself. What country did he most align with? We know that as a young man, he spent almost all of his time in Winnipeg and St. Thomas in Upper Canada. After that, he traveled internationally on the whaler, and that's where he ended up in Japan. After his Japanese experience, he returned to Canada and spent most of his time in British Columbia until his death, where he died and is buried near Colville, Washington, about 20 minutes from the Canada-US border. And here is where perhaps we learn of what citizenship Ranald claimed. In 1892, he sent a proposal for his biography, or I guess it would have been his autobiography, to a publisher in Montreal. And he called it, wait for it, A Canadian in Japan. So there you have it. The first English teacher in Japan was not only of First Nations ancestry, but was also a Canadian. Thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this. If you did enjoy it, please hit that like button and please subscribe. This helps us immensely and we'd love to produce more of this for you. Until next time.